The gunshot echoed across the dusty valley as Violet Whitaker's heart sank with despair. She had missed the target again, a simple tin can perched 20 paces away, and the weight of failure pressed down on her shoulders like an anvil. The year was 1883, and in the unforgiving landscape of Montana Territory, a woman who couldn't protect herself was as vulnerable as a newborn calf during wolf season. "That's the 5th shot wasted," she muttered, lowering the revolver with trembling hands. The gun had belonged to her father, now 6 feet under after a violent encounter with bandits 3 months prior. His death had left Violet alone on their small homestead, with winter approaching and threats lurking around every corner. From behind her, a low voice drawled, "Your grip's all wrong, Miss Whitaker." Violet spun around, startled to find Adam Zimmerman leaning against the fence post, his Stetson tilted low over his eyes. She hadn't heard him approach a testament to his years as a tracker and occasional bounty hunter. Adam had been her father's friend, stopping by every few months with supplies and stories from his travels. Now, he seemed to appear more frequently, though Violet pretended not to notice the pattern. "Mr. Zimmerman," she acknowledged stiffly, hastily tucking the gun into her skirt pocket. "I didn't realize anyone was watching." "Been standing here long enough to see you're more likely to shoot your own foot than hit anything worth aiming at," he replied, pushing off the fence and walking toward her with that distinctive gait, unhurried yet purposeful. At 32, Adam Zimmerman had the weathered look of a man who'd lived more lives than his years suggested. His face bore the marks of sun and wind, contrasting with eyes so vividly blue they reminded Violet of the mountain lakes her father used to take her fishing at. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His nose had been broken at least twice, and a thin scar ran along his jaw. But there was something magnetic about him that made Violet simultaneously want to step closer and back away. "I'm managing just fine," she lied, lifting her chin. "Just practicing." Adam's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Is that what you call it?" He gestured toward the untouched row of cans. "Because from where I'm standing it looks like you're wasting good ammunition." Heat rose to Violet's cheeks. At 24, she'd long passed the age when most women in these parts were married with several children. But circumstances caring for her ailing mother for years, then supporting her father after mother's passing, had left her unmarried and inexperienced in more ways than one, including, unfortunately, the handling of firearms. "I never needed to shoot before," she admitted. "Father always took care of everything." Adam nodded, understanding passing over his features. "And now you're trying to learn on your own." "What choice do I have?" The words came out sharper than intended, edged with the fear she tried desperately to hide. Rather than taking offense, Adam reached out slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the revolver in her pocket. After a moment's hesitation, Violet handed over the weapon. Adam checked it with practiced ease, his fingers moving deftly over the cylinder and barrel. "Your father's old Colt," he observed. "Good gun, but heavy for someone with smaller hands." He looked up, his expression serious. "I could teach you if you'd let me." The offer hung in the air between them. Pride warred with practicality in Violet's mind. She needed to learn, that much was clear. The isolated homestead had already attracted unwelcome attention from drifters and opportunists who'd heard about the widow who lived alone. So far, her father's reputation and the occasional presence of neighbors had kept trouble at bay, but she couldn't count on that forever. "I'm too ashamed to try," she finally confessed, looking away from his piercing gaze. "I've already made a fool of myself enough times." Adam stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather of his vest and the faint trace of tobacco. "Then shame ends tonight," he said with quiet authority. "We start at dawn tomorrow." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. "Expecting company?" Adam asked, his posture shifting subtly as his hand moved to rest on his own holstered revolver. Violet shook her head, apprehension creeping up her spine. "No. Get inside," he instructed, handing back her gun. "Lock the door. Don't come out unless you hear my voice." As Violet hurried toward the cabin, she glanced back to see Adam striding confidently toward the approaching riders, his figure tall and unbending against the backdrop of the Montana wilderness. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a flicker of something besides fear, something that might have been hope. The next morning arrived with the golden glow of dawn stretching across the valley. Violet had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous evening. The riders had turned out to be cowboys from the neighboring Sanders Ranch, bringing news of cattle rustlers in the area. Adam had sent them on their way with promises to keep an eye out, but the underlying message was clear. Danger was circling closer. She dressed quickly in her most practical skirt and a simple blouse, pinning her chestnut hair back in a no-nonsense bun. As she stepped onto the porch, the sight that greeted her made her pause. Adam had set up an array of targets, not just cans, but bottles of different sizes arranged at varying distances. He stood with his back to her, driving a wooden stake into the ground with powerful blows from a mallet. "You're punctual," he remarked without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "Good. We've got a lot to cover." "Have you been up long?" she asked, noticing the coffee pot steaming over a small fire. Adam straightened, finally looking at her. "Long enough to get things ready." He gestured toward the coffee. "Help yourself. You'll need the fortification." They spent the morning with Adam explaining the fundamentals of shooting stance, grip, sight alignment, breathing. He was a patient teacher, correcting her gently but firmly, never showing frustration when she struggled. By midday, Violet had managed to hit the closest targets consistently, a small achievement that nonetheless filled her with disproportionate pride. "Not bad," Adam acknowledged as they paused for a simple lunch of bread and dried venison. "You've got a good eye. The rest is just practice." Violet flexed her sore hands, aware of new calluses forming on her palms. "I never thought I could do even this much." "Most limitations are the ones we place on ourselves," Adam replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Your father knew that. It's why he never gave up, even when your mother's illness seemed hopeless." The mention of her parents brought a pang of grief, but also curiosity. "You and my father were close, weren't you? He always spoke highly of you." Adam's expression softened. "Thomas was a good man, one of the few I've met who lived by a code and never compromised it." He took a sip of water from his canteen. "He saved my life once, about 7 years back, ambushed near Fort Benton. I took a bullet meant for a completely different fight." "He never told me that story," Violet said, surprised. "That was Thomas, never one to boast." Adam's mouth curved in a half-smile. "He was more concerned with teaching me how to play chess afterward while I was recovering. Said a man should exercise his mind as much as his trigger finger." The image of her scholarly father patiently explaining chess moves to the rugged man before her made Violet smile. That sounds like him. As they returned to practice, Violet found herself stealing glances at Adam. There was something compelling about the contrast between his dangerous capability and his gentle instruction. When he positioned himself behind her to correct her stance, his hands guiding her arms into the proper position, she became acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of him, the controlled strength in his touch. "Breathe in," he murmured near her ear, "then exhale halfway and hold it as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull squeeze." Violet tried to focus on the target, not on the fact that she could feel Adam's heartbeat against her back. She followed his instructions, and the can 20 yards away pinged satisfyingly as the bullet struck true. "I did it!" she exclaimed, turning toward him with excitement. They found themselves face to face, mere inches apart. Adam's eyes darkened slightly, and for a breathless moment, Violet thought he might, but then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Good shot," he said, his voice a touch rougher than before. "Now do it again." The days fell into a pattern. Each morning, Adam would arrive at dawn, and they would practice until the heat of the day made shooting impossible. Then they would move to other skills: knife handling, tracking, even basic hand-to-hand defense. In the evenings, he would help with repairs around the homestead before riding back to wherever he was staying, refusing her offers to use the spare room. "Wouldn't be proper," was all he said on the matter, though his eyes often lingered on her longer than strictly necessary. As weeks passed, Violet found herself changing in ways beyond her improving marksmanship. She stood straighter, spoke more confidently, and began to envision a future where she might actually survive, even thrive on her own. Yet, paradoxically, as her independence grew, so did her awareness of Adam as more than just her teacher. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Violet gathered her courage to ask the question that had been circling her mind. "Why did you come back after Father died? You could be anywhere, doing anything. Instead, you're teaching a hopeless case how to shoot tin cans." Adam was quiet for so long that Violet thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Before Thomas passed, I saw him in town. He was worried about leaving you alone, said he'd been having chest pains. Made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure you were all right." Adam's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the arm of the chair. "I gave my word." Violet absorbed this, a complicated mixture of emotions washing through her. So this is obligation? A promise to a dying man? Adam turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "It started that way," he admitted, "but it's not why I keep coming back." Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the creek, 3 shots in rapid succession. Adam was on his feet instantly, pulling Violet up and pushing her toward the door. "Inside, get your gun and the extra ammunition." "What is it?" she asked, even as she moved to obey. "That's Frank Miller's signal. Trouble's coming." Frank Miller was their nearest neighbor, an elderly prospector who lived a mile downriver. The shots confirmed what the Sanders Cowboys had warned about raiders were in the area. Within minutes, Adam had extinguished all lights in the cabin and positioned Violet by the window with her father's rifle. "Remember what I taught you," he said, checking his own weapons. "Don't shoot unless you have to. If anything happens to me, there's a false bottom in the flour barrel. There's enough money there to get you to Denver, to your aunt." "Nothing's happening to you," Violet said firmly, though fear clawed at her insides. Adam's eyes met hers in the darkness. "Been in worse situations," he said with a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But if this goes sideways, I need to know you'll run. Promise me." Violet wanted to argue, but the intensity in his gaze stopped her. "I promise," she whispered. They waited in tense silence as night fully descended. The sounds of the Montana wilderness continued around them, crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance. It was almost possible to believe nothing was wrong, that this was just another evening. Then the crickets went silent. Adam touched her arm and pointed toward the barn. In the moonlight, Violet could make out shadowy figures moving stealthily across her property. 4 of them, Adam breathed, barely audible. 2 heading for the barn, 2 coming this way. Violet's heart hammered in her chest, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. Weeks of Adam's training had instilled muscle memory that overrode her fear. "When they get to the porch, I'll take the one on the left," Adam instructed. "You cover the right." The minutes stretched like hours as they watched the intruders approach. Violet could see them more clearly now, rough-looking men with bandanas covering the lower half of their faces. One carried a coil of rope, the other a shotgun. Just as the men reached the steps, a shot rang out from the direction of the barn. One of the other raiders had apparently discovered something or someone unexpected. The 2 men at the porch hesitated, turning toward the sound. It was all the opening Adam needed. He fired twice in rapid succession, dropping the man with the shotgun. Violet took aim at the second man as he raised his revolver and squeezed the trigger just as Adam had taught her. The man staggered but didn't fall. "Again!" Adam shouted, moving toward the door. Violet steadied herself and fired once more. This time, the man went down. Before she could process what had just happened, Adam was moving across the yard toward the barn, keeping to the shadows. Violet followed his instructions, covering him from the window, scanning for any additional threats. More gunfire erupted from the barn, 3 shots, then silence. The seconds ticked by with excruciating slowness. Then, to her immense relief, Adam emerged, supporting a wounded man she recognized as Jeremiah, one of the Sanders ranch hands. "It's clear," Adam called. "Come help with Jeremiah." The next hour passed in a blur as they tended to Jeremiah's wound, a bullet graze along his ribs, and secured the 2 surviving raiders. The other 2 had been killed in the exchange. Jeremiah explained that he'd been tracking the gang after they'd rustled Sanders' cattle and had followed them to the Whitaker property. "Reckon they figured an unprotected homestead would be easy pickings," he said as Violet bandaged his side. "Didn't count on running into Zimmerman here." "Or Miss Whitaker," Adam added, giving her a look that contained both pride and something deeper. "Her shot saved us both." After the Sanders foreman arrived with more hands to take custody of the raiders and collect their dead, Adam and Violet found themselves alone again in the quiet cabin. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving Violet drained yet strangely exhilarated. "You did well tonight," Adam said, watching her as she washed blood not her own from her hands in a basin. "Most people freeze their first time in a real firefight." "I had a good teacher," she replied, unable to look at him directly. The reality of what had happened, that she had shot a man, possibly killed him, was beginning to settle in her mind. Adam seemed to read her thoughts. "You did what was necessary," he said gently. "Those men came here to do harm. You protected yourself. And others." "I know," Violet said, drying her hands on a towel. "And I'd do it again. That's what surprises me. I always thought I'd be different, weaker." "Strength isn't about not feeling fear," Adam said, stepping closer. "It's about doing what needs doing despite it." Violet finally raised her eyes to his. "Is that why you keep coming back? Despite the danger it puts you in?" Something shifted in Adam's expression, a lowering of defenses, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I told you it wasn't just obligation." "Then what?" she pressed, her heart beating faster for reasons entirely unrelated to the night's violence. Adam's hand came up to touch her face, his calloused palm surprisingly gentle against her cheek. "I think you know." The kiss, when it finally came, was nothing like Violet had imagined in her private thoughts. It wasn't tentative or gentle, but urgent and honest, a testament to the night they'd survived and the truth that could no longer be denied between them. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I've been fighting this since the day I came back," he confessed, telling myself it wouldn't be right, that you deserved better than a man with my past. "Shouldn't I have a say in what I deserve?" Violet asked, her hands gripping the front of his shirt. Adam smiled a real smile that transformed his face. "You're not the same woman I found trying to shoot tin cans 3 months ago." "No," she agreed, "I'm not." The following weeks brought changes to the homestead. Adam moved his few possessions into the cabin, taking up residence in what had been her father's room while they made plans. The property began to transform. With his presence, new fencing went up, the barn roof was repaired, and Adam even talked about expanding the garden come spring. They were married by a traveling preacher who stopped at the Sanders ranch, with Jeremiah and Frank Miller serving as witnesses. It wasn't the grand affair some girls might have dreamed of, but as Violet exchanged vows with Adam beneath the vast Montana sky, she couldn't imagine anything more perfect. That night, as they lay entwined in what was now their bed, Adam traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. Violet propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "About marrying a man who snores when he sleeps on his back?" "Ask me in 20 years, Adam laughed, pulling her closer. "I'm serious. This life isn't easy. Never will be." "I don't want easy," she replied, kissing him softly. "I want real." As winter descended on the homestead, bringing with it howling winds and heavy snow, Violet found a contentment she hadn't thought possible after her father's death. There were still challenges, the harsh conditions, occasional threats from both nature and mankind, the isolation. But facing them with Adam at her side made all the difference. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside and they sat playing chess by the fire, Violet captured Adam's queen with a move he'd taught her weeks earlier. "You're getting too good at this," he complained good-naturedly. "Soon I won't be able to teach you anything." "I wouldn't say that," Violet replied with a meaningful glance that made Adam's eyes darken. Later, as they lay wrapped in quilts listening to the wind, Adam's hand drifted to rest on her stomach, which had just begun to show the slightest curve. "Still scared?" he asked, referring to her fears about the baby, about becoming a mother in this unforgiving land. Violet covered his hand with hers. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not ashamed to try anymore." Adam kissed her temple. "That's all I've ever asked." Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Thomas Zimmerman, named for Violet's mother and father. The delivery had been difficult, with the nearest doctor 3 days' ride away. But the midwife from the Blackfoot settlement to the north had been skilled and calm. As Violet recovered, cradling her newborn while watching Adam work in the garden they'd planted together, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened, helpless woman too ashamed to try, to someone who had found strength she never knew she possessed. Adam looked up from his work as if sensing her gaze, and smiled that rare, true smile that transformed his weathered face and made her heart skip even after a year together. He set down his tools and walked toward the porch, taking in the sight of his wife and daughter with undisguised wonder. "My 2 best girls," he said, sitting beside Violet and gently touching Elizabeth's tiny hand. "She has your eyes," Violet observed, watching as the baby's fingers curled around her father's much larger one. "Poor child," Adam chuckled, but his gaze was tender. "Let's hope she gets everything else from you." "Including my shooting skills?" Violet teased. "Especially those," Adam agreed, leaning in to kiss her softly. "Though I pray she never needs to use them the way you have." As the years passed, the Zimmerman homestead thrived. They added a son, James, 2 years after Elizabeth, and gradually expanded both their land and their reputation in the territory. Adam's skills as a tracker and Violet's surprisingly good head for business made them respected figures in the community that slowly grew around them. The Montana Territory changed too, becoming a state in 1889, bringing new settlers and new challenges. But through it all, Violet and Adam faced each obstacle together, their partnership only strengthening with time. On their 10th anniversary, as they stood on their expanded porch watching Elizabeth and James racing their ponies across the meadow, Adam wrapped an arm around Violet's waist. "Remember that day I found you missing all those tin cans?" he asked, amusement in his voice. Violet leaned into him, enjoying the solid warmth that had become her home more than any building ever could. "I was so embarrassed, convinced I'd never learn." "And now you're teaching Elizabeth to outshoot most men in the county," Adam said proudly. "She gets that determination from you." "She gets plenty from you too," Violet replied. "That stubborn streak isn't from my side." Adam laughed, turning her to face him. At 42, his hair had begun to show silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he was still the most handsome man Violet had ever known. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he'd asked on their wedding night. Violet reached up to touch the scar along his jaw, a familiar gesture that had become a language of its own between them. Not a single one, she answered truthfully. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Violet thought about the frightened woman she'd been and the journey that had led her here. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. That shame could only hold power if you allowed it to. And that love, real love, was worth every risk. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Adam asked, his blue eyes curious. "For the day you told me shame ends tonight," Violet replied. "You gave me more than just shooting lessons. You gave me back myself." Adam's expression softened as he pulled her closer. "You did the hard part," he said against her hair. "All I did was remind you of what was already there." As their children's laughter echoed across the valley and the first stars appeared in the deepening sky, Violet knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them without shame or hesitation, just as she had faced every day since that fateful evening when a stubborn cowboy had refused to let her surrender to her fears. "I love you, Adam Zimmerman," she whispered. His answer was a kiss that, even after a decade together, still made her heart race like that very first time. And in that moment, beneath the vast Montana sky that had witnessed their journey, Violet knew with absolute certainty that this love, this life they had built together was exactly where she was meant to be.